Hey, what is up everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There are violations of the sanctum that cannot be forgiven, and in the depths of tomb worlds scattered across the galaxy, ancient guardians wait for precisely such transgressions. Picture, if you will, a world that appears dead from orbit. Barren sand stretches across continents like the skin of a corpse, unmarked by weather, unchanged by time. The wind itself seems hesitant here, as though the very atmosphere knows something waits beneath, something that should not be disturbed. This is the surface of a Necron tomb world, and somewhere far below, in chambers older than the rise of mankind, older than the fall of the Eldar, something stirs. The intrusion begins not with the thunder of orbital bombardment, nor with the screaming descent of drop pods raining from the heavens. It begins with a single footfall, the weight of something far heavier than any mortal man pressing down upon sand that has known no tread for 60 million years. The intruder is a being of impossible stature, standing perhaps 3 times the height of a normal human, clad in armor that would require a tank's engine to power for lesser beings. This is a Primarch, one of the Emperor's 20 demigod sons, and he has come seeking something in this forgotten place. Perhaps it is knowledge, perhaps it is a weapon, perhaps it is simply the destruction of a threat his far-seeing mind has perceived. The reason matters little to what waits below. All that matters is the intrusion itself. Deep beneath the surface, in galleries carved from living metal and stone that predates the birth of stars, systems begin to wake. The first stirring is not consciousness, not truly. It is something far more primitive, an algorithmic response hardwired into technology so advanced it might as well be magic. Sensors designed to detect the impossible, to measure disturbances in the fabric of reality itself, register the presence above. The weight is wrong. The thermal signature is wrong. The very existence of this thing violates parameters set down when the galaxy was young. And so the tomb begins its ancient protocols, the first whispers of an awakening that will shake this world to its foundations. The Primarch cannot know, not yet, that every step he takes is being catalogued, analyzed, threat assessed by minds that are not minds, by intelligences that have no intelligence in any sense he would understand. He cannot know that beneath his feet, in crypts sealed against the passage of time itself, warriors older than empires are beginning to stir. Their bodies, if they can be called bodies, are constructs of necrodermis, living metal that flows and reforms, that repairs damage that would obliterate lesser materials. Their minds, what remains of them, are nothing but purpose and protocol, memories of flesh long since stripped away, replaced with the cold certainty of eternal servitude. The tomb's master program, often called a deep spirit by those few imperial scholars who have studied these places and survived, processes the intrusion with the speed of thought. It calculates threat levels, assesses required responses, prioritizes awakening sequences according to algorithms written when humanity's ancestors still swung through trees. The Primarch registers as category extreme threat. The mass is too great, the power signature too intense, the psychic resonance too profound to be anything but a being of immense capability. The master program does not feel fear. It does not feel anything. But if it could, it might hesitate, might question whether its forces, even fully awakened, could stand against such a being. Instead, it simply implements protocols that have waited 60 million years for their moment. The awakening begins with the lowest order of defenders. In chambers throughout the tomb complex, stasis fields flicker and die. Necron warriors, the most basic and numerous of their kind, feel the cold fire of reactivation coursing through their metallic frames. These are not the noble Necron tier who once walked as flesh and blood. The biotransference that transformed them from living beings into immortal machines was not kind to the lower castes. What little remained of their personalities was stripped away, leaving only the most basic imperatives. nothing more than programming wearing the shape of sentience. They rise from their alcoves with movements that are mechanical yet somehow fluid, ghost flayers materializing in hands that have not moved in epochs. These warriors do not question their orders. They cannot. The capacity for doubt was burned away in the furnaces of the biotransference, along with everything else that made them individuals. They simply move, flowing through corridors that shift and reconfigure around them, the tomb's architecture responding to commands from the master program. They head toward the intrusion point with the inexorable patience of the truly immortal. If they fail, they will be repaired. If they are destroyed, they will be rebuilt. Death, in any meaningful sense, no longer applies to them. They are weapons that think, nothing more, nothing less. Above, on the surface, the Primarch senses something changing. His enhanced senses, far beyond those of any normal human, detect vibrations in the ground that should not be there. The pattern is wrong, too regular, too purposeful to be natural seismic activity. His hand moves to his weapon, a blade or gun crafted by the finest artificers of the Imperium, blessed by tech priests and anointed with oils older than memory. He has fought in 1,000 battles across 1,000 worlds, has stood against demons and Xenos and traitors beyond counting. Yet something about this moment makes even his transhuman nerves tighten with anticipation. The sand before him begins to shift. What appeared to be solid ground reveals itself as an illusion, a camouflage screen sophisticated beyond anything the Imperium could produce. The surface parts, like water, revealing a shaft descending into darkness so complete it seems to drink the light. From this opening comes a sound unlike anything the Primarch has heard before, a humming that exists at the edge of perception, half in the material world and half in something else entirely. It is the sound of ancient machinery coming to life, of systems that should have remained dormant until the stars themselves burned out. The first Necron warrior emerges from the shaft with movements that are wrong in a way the Primarch cannot quite articulate. It is not the jerky motion of servitor or automaton, nor the fluid grace of living tissue. It is something in between, something that suggests the thing was once alive, but has forgotten what that means. Its skeletal frame is wrought from metal that shifts and flows even as it stands, self-repairing mechanisms constantly working to maintain its form. In its hands, the Gauss flare hums with barely contained energy, green light pulsing along conduits that run the length of the weapon like veins carrying poison instead of blood. The Primarch does not hesitate. His weapon moves with speed that would be invisible to mortal eyes, crossing the distance to the Necron in less time than it takes a heart to beat. The strike is perfect, guided by centuries of training and enhanced by the genetic engineering that makes him more than human. The blow that would cleave a space marine in half, that would shatter ceramite and crack plasteel, connects with the Necron warrior's torso with a sound like thunder. For a moment, it seems as though the attack has succeeded. The Necron's chest cavity shows a massive wound, metal peeled back to reveal the intricate mechanisms within. But the Primarch's triumph is short-lived. Green energy crackles around the wound, and before his eyes, the damage begins to unmake itself. Necrodermis flows like liquid, filling the gap, reforming structures that should have been irreparably damaged. The self-repair is not instantaneous, but it is inexorable, and within moments, the Necron stands whole once more, its weapon tracking toward the Primarch with mechanical precision. This is the Primarch's first true understanding of what he faces. These are not merely advanced automata, not simply well-crafted machines. These are beings who have cheated death itself, who have traded their mortality for something that cannot truly be called life, but refuses to be called death. The reanimation protocols that govern them are technology so advanced as to be indistinguishable from magic, operating on principles that even the Adeptus Mechanicus would struggle to comprehend. Each time a Necron falls, unless it is so catastrophically damaged that its atoms are scattered beyond recovery, it will simply rise again, repaired by nanoscale scarabs or teleported back to the tomb's restoration facilities. But the Primarch is no ordinary opponent. He was created by the Emperor himself, forged from genetic material drawn from the master of mankind, and shaped by technologies that predate the age of strife. His reflexes are beyond superhuman, his strength sufficient to tear apart tanks with his bare hands, his durability enough to survive wounds that would kill even space marines. He adapts to this new understanding with the speed that only his kind can manage. If the Necrons can repair themselves, then he must simply destroy them faster than they can rebuild. If they cannot truly die, then he must find ways to disable them so completely that their self-repair systems cannot keep pace. The Gauss flare fires, and the Primarch learns the second terrible lesson of fighting Necrons. The weapon does not fire bolts of energy in any conventional sense. Instead, it projects a field that strips matter apart at the molecular level, peeling away atoms layer by layer until nothing remains. His armor, crafted by the finest artificers and blessed by the most holy of tech priests, begins to disintegrate under the emerald beam. He moves faster than the targeting systems can track, and the beam misses, but not by much. Where it strikes the ground, sand transforms into glass and then into nothing. Matter simply ceasing to exist, as the Gauss effect reduces it to its component particles and scatters them to the wind. More Necron warriors are emerging now, dozens of them, then hundreds. The shaft that opened in the sand is not the only entrance. All around the Primarch, the ground begins to shift and part, revealing access points that have lain hidden for epochs. The tomb is responding to his presence with the full weight of its defense protocols, bringing more and more of its warriors online. Each one that emerges adds its Gauss flare to the barrage, green beams crisscrossing the air like a deadly web. The Primarch finds himself in a tactical situation that would be suicide for any other being, surrounded by enemies who cannot die and armed with weapons that can unmake his very substance. Yet he does not retreat. Primarchs do not know how to retreat, not truly. It was burned out of them in their creation, replaced with an absolute certainty that they are the apex of warfare, the pinnacle of combat prowess. He fights with a fury that is terrible to behold, his weapon moving so fast it seems to exist in multiple places at once. Necrons fall before him like wheat before a scythe, their bodies torn apart by blows that shatter necrodermis and scatter the intricate mechanisms within. For each one he destroys, two more rise from the tombs, but still he fights, still he destroys, still he refuses to acknowledge the impossibility of his situation. Deep within the tomb, in a chamber far larger and far more ornate than those housing the warriors, something else begins to wake. Where the warriors are nothing but base programming, this consciousness is something more, something that retained enough of its original personality through the biotransference to still think of itself as an individual. An overlord, one of the Necron nobility, feels the cold fire of awakening spreading through its frame. For a moment, a fleeting instant that lasts less than a nanosecond in objective time, but feels like an eternity to the awakening consciousness, it experiences something akin to disorientation. How long has it slept? What is the current state of the galaxy? Why has it been awakened? The answers flood into its consciousness through data streams that connect it to the tomb's master program. The intrusion, the threat assessment, the ongoing battle on the surface. The Overlord processes this information with a speed that would be impossible for organic minds. It sees through the optical sensors of the warriors fighting above, experiences their destruction and reconstruction, feels the weight of the intruder's presence pressing down on the tomb like a physical thing, and in that moment of full awareness, the Overlord makes a decision that will determine the course of this confrontation. The intruder is powerful, yes, more powerful than any single opponent the Overlord has data on from its race's long history. The power signature suggests something beyond mortal creation, something touched by forces that operate outside the normal bounds of reality. This is not merely a space marine, formidable though those warriors might be. This is something greater, something that might pose a genuine threat to the tomb's integrity if allowed to proceed unchecked. The Overlord issues commands through thought impulses that travel at the speed of light through the tomb's neural network. Wake the immortals. Activate the Canoptech constructs. Bring the defensive weapons online. And most importantly, awaken the other overlords. This threat requires more than a simple defensive action. This threat requires the full might of the dynasty. On the surface, the Primarch is beginning to understand the true scope of what he faces. The warriors, troublesome though they are with their endless regeneration, are merely the first wave. Now, emerging from newly opened tomb entrances, come different shapes. These are larger, more heavily armored, moving with a confidence and purpose that suggests something more than base programming. These are Necron immortals, warriors who retained more of their consciousness through the biotransference, who were of higher rank in the old Necron-Tyre civilization, and were thus granted more sophisticated bodies, more advanced weaponry, more of everything that might preserve some fragment of what they once were. Their weapons are different from the Gauss flares of the warriors. Tesla carbines crackle with arcs of electricity that leap from target to target, seeking flesh and metal alike. Gauss blasters fire heavier beams that can strip apart even the Primarch's enhanced armor with terrifying efficiency. The Immortals move with something approaching tactics, coordinating their fire, falling back when damaged to allow their reanimation protocols time to restore them, advancing when the Primarch's attention is elsewhere. They are still limited, still constrained by the restrictions of their mechanical existence, but they are thinking in a way the warriors cannot. They are adapting to him, even as he adapts to them. The Primarch alters his strategy. He cannot simply hack through these forces as he did the warriors. The Immortals are too durable, too numerous, too well coordinated. He begins to move differently, using the terrain to his advantage, breaking line of sight when the Gauss weapons fire becomes too intense. Striking from unexpected angles to catch the Necrons before they can coordinate a response. He is a master of war, trained by the Emperor himself in arts of combat that were old when humanity first looked to the stars. He applies these lessons now, treating the Necrons not as mindless automata, but as a thinking enemy, deserving of his full tactical acumen. But the tomb is not finished revealing its secrets. As the Primarch fights, as his weapon rises and falls in a rhythm of destruction and movement, the sand around him begins to shudder with a deeper vibration. Something massive is moving beneath the surface, something far larger than the warriors and immortals he has been fighting. The ground splits open in a dozen new places, and from these openings come shapes that make even the Primarch pause in his assault. Canoptech constructs. The tomb's autonomous guardians and caretakers emerge into the pale light of this world's sun. Canoptech scarabs come first, clouds of them, each individual unit no larger than a human hand, but swarming in numbers that blacken the sky. These are not weapons in the conventional sense. They are construction and deconstruction tools designed to repair the tomb's structure and break down intruding materials for resources. But to an intruder, they are a nightmare made manifest. The swarm descends on the Primarch like a living wave, millions of tiny constructs working to dismantle his armor atom by atom, to strip away the blessed metals and sacred oils, to reduce the products of the Imperium's finest artificers to raw materials. The Primarch's weapon cannot effectively target such small, numerous enemies. He moves through the swarm like a man fighting through a sandstorm, each step contested, each moment seeing more of his armor stripped away by the relentless deconstruction. His enhanced durability keeps him alive where any other being would have been reduced to component atoms. But even his preternatural healing cannot keep pace with the damage being inflicted. For the first time since descending to this cursed world, he considers the possibility that he might not survive this encounter. Then the canoptek spiders arrive, massive constructs that loom over even the Primarch's considerable height. These are not mere repair automatons like the scarabs. These are mobile factories, capable of producing more scarabs on the fly, equipped with weapons that can carve through tank armor, armored sufficiently to shrug off blows that would destroy lesser machines. They advance on the Primarch with the relentless patience of things that have all the time in the universe, their particle beam dissectors, painting targeting reticules across his armor. The Primarch finds himself in a situation that would break lesser warriors. Surrounded by endless waves of warriors and immortals, beset by swarms of scarabs that are systematically dismantling his armor, hunted by canoptek spiders that treat him as nothing more than another obstacle to be removed. His weapon continues to move, continues to strike, continues to destroy. Necrons fall by the dozen, by the hundred, their bodies torn apart or scattered to atoms. But for every one he destroys, the tomb spawns two more. The ancient factories deep beneath the surface working at capacity to replenish the defensive forces. In the depths of the tomb, the Council of Overlords convenes. It is not a meeting in any physical sense. They exist in too many places simultaneously, their consciousness distributed across networks that span the entire tomb complex. Instead, they share data streams, exchanging information at speeds that make light seem slow. They view the battle through countless perspectives, through the optical sensors of warriors and immortals, through the targeting systems of the canoptek constructs, through sensors embedded in the tomb's very walls. They see the Primarch from every angle, witness his prowess from every perspective, and in their cold mechanical minds, something akin to respect emerges. This intruder has destroyed over 300 of their warriors and 50 of their immortals. It has weathered attacks from weapons that can unmake matter itself, has survived assault from swarms that have dismantled entire armies. Its combat capability exceeds all parameters in their databases, suggests a level of engineering sophistication that rivals even the technology of the Necrontyre at their height. The Overlords calculate probabilities, run tactical simulations, project potential outcomes. In 97% of scenarios, the intruder will eventually be overwhelmed by sheer numbers and the impossibility of fighting an enemy that cannot truly die. But that remaining 3%, that slim margin where the intruder somehow prevails, is unacceptable. The lead overlord, the pharaoh of this tomb world, makes the decision. Activate the heavier weapons, release the destroyer cults from their isolation, and most significantly, prepare to engage personally. This intruder has earned the attention of nobility, has proven itself worthy of facing the full might of those who once ruled the galaxy. The Pharaoh's consciousness withdraws from the council, flowing back into its primary form in the throne room, deep within the tomb's heart. This body is magnificent in a way the warriors and even the immortals are not. Where they are skeletal and bare, functional but unadorned, the Pharaoh's frame is a work of art. Necrodermis polished to a mirror sheen, inlaid with chronometric circuitry that glows with the soft green light of its power source, equipped with weapons that are relics from the war in heaven itself. The Pharaoh rises from its throne, where it has sat motionless for 60 million years, and begins the long walk to the surface. Around it, other overlords do the same, each in their own chambers, each preparing to join the battle that rages above. On the surface, the Primarch senses the change before he sees it. The pattern of the assault shifts, becomes more coordinated, more purposeful. The Necrons are no longer simply throwing bodies at him in endless waves. They are maneuvering, creating kill zones, herding him towards specific areas. He recognizes the tactic because it is one he has used himself countless times, directing his own forces to channel an enemy into a position where they can be most effectively destroyed. He moves to counter this tactic, refusing to be dictated to, but the Necrons adapt to his adaptation, shifting their own positions in response. Then the heavy weapons begin to fire. From entrances he had not even noticed, larger constructs emerge. Doomstalkers, massive tripedal platforms mounting doomsday blasters capable of cracking open fortress walls. Destroyers, fallen Necrons, so consumed by hatred for living things that they were granted bodies designed purely for killing, floating on anti-gravitic motors and wielding weapons that make the Gauss flares of the warriors seem like toys by comparison. These do not engage in the patient, coordinated assault of the immortals. They attack with a fury that seems almost alive, almost organic in its intensity, pouring fire into the Primarch's position with abandon. The Doomsday Blast strikes first, a beam of energy so intense it turns the sand beneath the Primarch's feet into a crater of molten glass. Only his superhuman reflexes save him, throwing him clear of the impact zone a fraction of a second before the beam would have caught him full on. Even the edge of the blast is enough to sear his armor, to cook the flesh beneath despite the protective layers and void shielding. He rolls to his feet, already moving before the destroyers can lock onto his new position, and finds himself facing an enemy unlike any he has encountered so far. The destroyer that hunts him is a thing of pure malice. Whatever remained of its personality after the biotransference has been consumed by hatred for all living things, twisted by millions of years of isolation and endless contemplation of mortality. It sees the Primarch not as a threat to be neutralized, but as an affront to be eradicated, as a mockery of the life it has lost. Its weapons track the Primarch with manic intensity, Gauss cannon firing in bursts that turn stone to dust and metal to vapor. The Primarch meets its charge with his own, weapons striking against the destroyer's armored chassis with force enough to shatter stone. The impact tears away armor plating, sends components scattering, but the destroyer does not slow. It cannot feel pain, cannot know fear, cannot comprehend the concept of retreat. It is hatred given form, programmed with a single imperative that overrides all others: destroy the living. The two clash again and again, titanic blows exchanged at speeds that would be impossible for mortal eyes to follow, each strike capable of ending any normal battle instantly. Around this central duel, the battle continues. Warriors and immortals press their assault, their weapons never ceasing their deadly work. Canoptek scarabs swarm and rebuild their numbers as fast as the Primarch can scatter them. Doomstalkers fire their massive weapons whenever they can acquire a clear shot, caring nothing for the warriors and immortals caught in the blast zone. The Necrons cannot be harmed by friendly fire in any meaningful sense. If they are destroyed by their own weapons, they will simply be repaired, just as if the enemy had destroyed them. Only the intruder's death matters, only the elimination of the threat. The Primarch is being worn down, not quickly, not easily, but inexorably. His armor, blessed and ancient though it is, has been stripped away in places, revealing the enhanced flesh beneath. That flesh, tougher than any normal human tissue, is marked with burns from Gauss weapons and Tesla arcs. His stamina, far greater than any mortal's, is not infinite. Each strike of his weapon requires energy, each dodge and weave drains his reserves, each wound must be healed by his enhanced biology. The Necrons, by contrast, do not tire, do not slow, do not cease. They are the ultimate war of attrition, an enemy that can trade losses indefinitely because those losses are only temporary setbacks. And then, the tomb's true masters arrive. The Pharaon emerges from a tomb entrance that opens directly onto the battlefield, surrounded by a court of lesser overlords and Necron lords. Their presence changes the entire character of the engagement. Where before the Necrons fought with cold efficiency, now they fight with purpose, with direction, with something that approaches genuine tactical genius. The Pharaon's mind, preserved through the biotransference, far more completely than those of the warriors, or even the immortals, is a strategic instrument honed by millions of years of warfare. Through the phylactery network that connects all Necrons of the dynasty, the Pharaon's will spreads across the battlefield. Warriors that were advancing independently now move in perfect coordination, creating interlocking fields of fire that leave no room for escape. Immortals that were engaging in simple tactical maneuvers now execute complex strategies that would challenge the best Space Marine commanders. The Canoptech constructs, previously operating on basic programming, now act as extensions of the Pharaon's will, anticipating the Primarch's movements and positioning themselves accordingly. The Primarch recognizes the change immediately. He has fought against enough brilliant commanders to know when he faces one across a battlefield. This is no longer a simple defensive action by automated systems. This is a genuine military operation, commanded by a mind that understands warfare at a level that rivals his own. The Pharaon does not engage him directly, not yet. Instead, it orchestrates the battle like a conductor directing a symphony, each element of its forces playing their part in a grand design aimed at a single goal, the Primarch's destruction. The tactics shift and evolve with frightening speed. When the Primarch attempts to break through the encirclement, Lich Guard materialize through dimensional translocation, their dispersion shields catching his blows, while their hyperphase swords carve through his armor. When he tries to create distance, to find room to maneuver, wraiths phase through the ground beneath his feet, their whip-like tentacles seeking to entangle and immobilize him. When he focuses on one threat, another emerges from an unexpected angle, coordinated by the Pharaon's oversight to exploit the momentary opening. For the first time, the Primarch faces the possibility not just of defeat, but of absolute annihilation. He has been in desperate situations before, has fought against impossible odds, and emerged victorious through skill and determination, and the sheer superhuman capability that makes him what he is. But this is different. This is an enemy that cannot be defeated through conventional means, led by a commander whose experience spans epochs, supported by technology that makes the Imperium's finest achievements look like primitive tools. The Pharaon finally moves to engage directly, and the Primarch understands that this is the true test. Everything before has been prelude, a softening up operation designed to wear him down before the real battle begins. The Pharaon carries a war scythe, a weapon that incorporates both a phase blade, capable of cutting through any material, and a Gauss projector that can strip matter apart at range. Its armor is far superior to that of even the Immortals, composed of necrodermis so advanced it can reconfigure itself in response to incoming attacks, hardening where it needs to be hard and flowing where it needs to be flexible. They meet in the center of the battlefield, demigod and deathless Xenos, and the impact of their collision sends shockwaves across the sand. The Primarch's weapon strikes the Pharaon's war scythe, and the two weapons scream against each other, reality itself protesting the meeting of such forces. For a moment, they stand locked in a contest of pure strength, transhuman muscle against mechanisms that draw power from the fundamental forces of the universe. Then they break apart, and the true duel begins. The Pharaon fights with a style that is ancient beyond measure, techniques perfected when humanity's ancestors were still figuring out how to make fire. Every strike is precise, calculated, optimized for maximum efficiency. There is no wasted movement, no excess, no flourish for the sake of aesthetics. It is warfare distilled to its purest form, combat as mathematics. The Primarch counters with his own prowess.
I have to admit, the first time I read about a Primarch actually being forced to retreat from a Necron tomb world, it completely changed how I viewed this setting. We spend so much time focusing on chaos as the existential threat, but the Necrons, they're patient, they're calculating, and they've already ruled the galaxy once. That's genuinely terrifying in a way that even demons aren't. It made me go back and reread all the Necron Codex entries with fresh eyes. But anyways, let's go back to the story.
The culmination of training from the Emperor himself and experience from 1,000 battlefields. His style is more adaptable, more fluid, changing from moment to moment in response to what the Pharaon presents. They are evenly matched in a way that both find disturbing. The Primarch has rarely encountered an opponent who can match him blow for blow, who can anticipate his strikes and counter them, who can exploit the tiny gaps in his defense that would be invisible to lesser fighters. The Pharaon, for its part, processes combat data that should not be possible. This organic creature, this being of flesh and bone wrapped in metal shell, is fighting at a level that exceeds all projections. Its physical capabilities alone should not be sufficient to stand against a Necron overlord in full battle regalia. Yet here it stands. Not just surviving, but challenging, pushing the Pharaon to utilize combat algorithms it has not employed in millions of years. Around them, the battle continues, but both combatants are focused entirely on each other. The warriors and immortals maintain their assault on the Primarch's position, but they are peripheral now, background noise to the central confrontation. The Primarch knows, on some level, that he cannot defeat the entire tomb. Even if he destroys the Pharaon, even if he cuts down every Necron on this battlefield, more will rise. The tomb has reserves that dwarf anything he has seen so far. Warriors and immortals, and Lichguard, and destroyers by the thousands, all waiting in stasis for the command to wake. But perhaps, just perhaps, if he can defeat the Pharaon, he can buy enough time to escape. To withdraw and plan a more comprehensive assault with forces adequate to the task. The Pharaon's thoughts run along similar lines, though from a different direction. This intruder must be stopped here, must not be allowed to escape and return with greater numbers. The tomb is vulnerable during this awakening phase, systems still coming online, forces still being marshaled. A full-scale Imperial assault, while the tomb is in this state, could be catastrophic. The Pharaon needs to end this now, to destroy the Primarch so completely that not even his enhanced biology can save him, to ensure that no trace of him escapes to carry word back to the Imperium. They press each other harder, the tempo of their duel increasing to speeds that are barely possible to perceive. The war scythe traces patterns in the air that would slice through tank armor like tissue. The Primarch's weapon carves trails of disrupted reality where it passes, blessed by rites that make it anathema to Xenos technology. Each blow that lands causes catastrophic damage. The Primarch's armor is rent in places, revealing flesh that bleeds despite its superhuman resilience. The Pharaon's body shows gaps where the necrodermis has been torn away, exposing the intricate mechanisms beneath. But both are healing, regenerating, refusing to fall. The Primarch's enhanced biology knits his wounds closed even as new ones are opened, his 3 lungs working in concert to oxygenate blood that flows through 3 hearts, his entire physiology designed for exactly this kind of sustained combat. The Pharaon's reanimation protocols work ceaselessly. Nanoscale scarabs swarming over damaged areas, necrodermis flowing to fill gaps, self-repair systems operating at maximum capacity. It is a battle between 2 beings who refuse to accept the possibility of their own defeat, who have been designed or engineered specifically to stand against the impossible and emerge victorious. The stalemate cannot last. Something must give. Someone must make a mistake. Some factor must tip the balance. That factor comes not from either combatant, but from the battlefield around them. A Doomstalker, repositioning for a better firing angle on Necron warriors fighting at the perimeter, accidentally triggers its Doomsday Blaster in the general direction of the duel. The Pharaon, with its superior sensory apparatus and perfect awareness of all friendly units' positions, detects the incoming fire and moves to avoid it with microseconds to spare. The Primarch, focused entirely on his opponent and lacking the Pharaon's comprehensive battlefield awareness, does not. The Doomsday Blast catches him from behind, the massive beam of energy enveloping his body in destructive force meant to crack open fortifications. His armor, already weakened by sustained combat, cannot withstand this additional assault. Pieces of it simply cease to exist, unmade by the beam's reality-warping properties. The flesh beneath, superhuman though it is, blackens and cooks, his enhanced healing struggling to cope with damage of this magnitude. He staggers, his guard dropping for just an instant, and that instant is all the Pharaon needs. The war scythe strikes, its phase blade ignoring what remains of the Primarch's armor to cut directly into the flesh beneath. The wound is catastrophic, severing major blood vessels and damaging organs that even the Primarch's redundant biology cannot easily compensate for. He falls to one knee, weapon dropping from hands that suddenly lack the strength to hold it, blood the color of engine oil pouring from wounds that his body cannot seal quickly enough. The Pharaon stands over him, war scythe raised for the killing blow, and for a moment the outcome seems certain. The Primarch will die here, on this forgotten world, his body to be taken as a prize for the tomb's collection, studied and eventually displayed as a trophy of the dynasty's superiority. But the Primarch is not finished. With the last of his strength, with determination fueled by genetic imperatives that will not allow him to surrender, he lunges forward, inside the reach of the war scythe, one hand grasping the Pharaon's arm, while the other delivers a strike to its torso, with force born of pure desperation. The blow connects with precision that seems impossible for someone so gravely wounded. The Primarch's fist, enhanced by the full might of his genetically engineered muscle and bone, strikes a critical juncture in the Pharaon's body, a nexus where multiple systems intersect. The impact causes a cascade failure, systems shutting down, power feeds rupturing, the careful balance of the Pharaon's form disrupted. For a moment, for just a single moment, the ancient Xenos Lord experiences something it has not felt in 60 million years. Vulnerability. The Primarch does not waste the opportunity. His other hand finds his weapon, fingers closing around its grip through what seems to be pure force of will, and he drives it forward into the gap created by his first strike. The blessed blade, anathema to Xenos technology, plunges deep into the Pharaon's core, disrupting systems that have functioned flawlessly for epochs. The Pharaon's reanimation protocols trigger immediately, nanoscale scarabs swarming to the damage site, but the weapon is actively fighting them, holy technologies clashing against ancient mechanisms in a contest that shakes both combatants. Then, just as it seems the Primarch might actually triumph, might actually achieve the impossible and slay this ancient horror, his strength fails. The wounds from the Doomsday Blast, the countless smaller injuries inflicted during the prolonged combat, the sheer exhaustion of fighting for hours against endless enemies, all of it catches up to him at once. He collapses, his weapons slipping from the Pharaon's body, consciousness fading as his body begins the process of shutting down non-essential systems to preserve life. The Pharaon staggers back, its own systems in disarray, damage spreading faster than reanimation protocols can contain. It falls to one knee, mirroring the Primarch's earlier position, war scythe planted in the sand to keep it upright. For a long moment, both combatants kneel in the sand, neither capable of continuing the fight, each waiting to see whether their body's repair systems will restore them to functionality before the others do. The decision is made by external factors. From the sky, drop pods begin to rain down, their retro thrusters screaming as they decelerate from orbital velocity. The Primarch's forces, alerted by his extended absence, or perhaps by signals from his armor's emergency beacon, have arrived. Space Marines, the sons of this fallen demigod, pour from the drop pods with bolters firing, their fury at seeing their gene father fallen, driving them to feats of courage that would be suicidal under any other circumstances. At the same time, deeper in the tomb, final awakening protocols trigger. The most ancient and powerful of the dynasty's forces begin to stir, beings that have not woken since the tomb was first sealed. The tomb has determined that the threat level now justifies their deployment, that nothing less than the full might of the dynasty will suffice. The sand around the battlefield begins to shimmer with dimensional translocation effects as fresh forces prepare to emerge. But neither of these reinforcements will arrive in time to affect the current confrontation. The Primarch's Space Marines reach him first, forming a defensive perimeter, several of the apothecaries immediately beginning emergency medical procedures. The Pharaon's own guard, Lichguard, who have been fighting at the battlefield's edges, phase through obstacles to reach their lord's position, their dispersion shields forming a barrier against incoming fire. The Primarch is extracted under heavy covering fire, his forces suffering terrible casualties to buy time for his evacuation. Necrons fall by the dozen, but more rise to replace them, the endless cycle of death and resurrection playing out across the battlefield. The Space Marines fight with the desperation of warriors who know they are massively outmatched, but refuse to abandon their father. Many of them will not leave this world. Many of them know it. They fight anyway, because that is what they were created to do. In the end, the Space Marines manage to create enough of an opening to retreat, carrying their Primarch's broken body back to their landing craft. The Necrons do not pursue beyond a certain point. The Tomb's master program, now fully online and coordinating the defense, calculates that the intruders are withdrawing and assesses that allowing them to leave is the optimal outcome. Pursuing them off-world would require forces that are needed here for the full awakening process, for securing the tomb against potential follow-up attacks. The Pharaon, its systems gradually restoring themselves through the tireless work of reanimation protocols, watches the Imperial forces retreat through optical sensors that are still flickering in and out of function. A part of its ancient mind, the part that still remembers what it was like to have opinions and preferences, acknowledges a certain satisfaction in the outcome. The intruder has been driven off, the tomb's integrity maintained. Yet there is also something that might be called curiosity, a desire to understand what that being was, how it was created, what forces could forge such a formidable warrior. As the last of the Imperial ships break orbit, fleeing the system before the tomb can deploy its full aerial forces, the Pharaon makes a decision. It will study the recordings of this battle, will analyze every moment of the confrontation, will build a comprehensive tactical profile of this enemy. The Primarchs, as the Imperial forces call them, represent a threat that the Necrons have not encountered before. If there are more of these beings, if they represent a new phase in humanity's evolution, or a new weapon in their arsenal, then the dynasties must be prepared to face them. The tomb begins the process of full revival, systems coming online one by one, forces awakening in their proper sequence. Cryptechs examine the damage to the surface installations, calculate the resources needed for repairs, begin the work of restoration. Warriors return to their alcoves to await the next alert, their brief moment of activity over, their programming satisfied that the threat has been neutralized. The Canoptech constructs resume their maintenance duties, repairing the devastation wrought by the battle, recycling destroyed warriors and immortals back into raw materials for future use. In a chamber deep within the tomb, damaged components from the Pharaon's own body are being analyzed. The blow struck by the Primarch had been extraordinarily precise, targeting systems that should not have been vulnerable to such a strike. The cryptechs studying the damage note this in their records, flag it as a matter requiring further investigation. How did the intruder know where to strike? Was it luck, or did these Primarchs possess some inherent understanding of Necron physiology? The questions multiply, each answer spawning new questions, the kind of intellectual puzzle that some cryptechs find almost pleasurable to contemplate. Meanwhile, in the medici bay of the fleeing Imperial ship, apothecaries work frantically to save their Primarch's life. The wounds are grievous beyond anything they have seen, beyond anything they were trained to treat. Gauss weapon strikes have unmade portions of his body at the molecular level, leaving gaps that refuse to heal normally. Tesla burns have seared through muscle and organ tissue. The impact from the doomsday blast has damaged his skeleton in ways that should be impossible for something as resilient as a Primarch's bones. Yet he lives. His hearts, all three of them, continue to beat, irregular but functional. His lungs draw breath, labored but steady. His enhanced biology fights the damage with every tool at its disposal, redirecting resources, triggering emergency healing responses, sacrificing non-essential functions to preserve the vital ones. The apothecaries do what they can to support these natural processes, providing transfusions of blood and biological materials, administering unguents and medicines that would kill a normal human but might help a being of the Primarch's constitution. In the brief moments when his consciousness surfaces from the darkness of near death, the Primarch's mind turns over what he experienced. He had fought beings of terrible power before, had stood against demons and Xenos warlords and traitor Primarchs. But this was different. This was not a single enemy, however powerful, but an entire civilization's worth of technology and knowledge focused on his destruction. He had been outmatched not by superior skill or strength, but by sheer systematic efficiency, by an enemy that could not be defeated through any amount of individual prowess. The strategic implications trouble him more than the physical injuries. If this is what a single tomb world could bring to bear, what would happen when the full might of the Necron dynasties awoke? How could the Imperium, struggling as it already was against chaos and the Tyranids and a dozen other threats, possibly stand against an enemy that had once ruled the galaxy? These thoughts circle through his mind in the moments before unconsciousness claims him again, questions that will haunt him if he survives. Back on the tomb world, the Pharaon has completed its initial repairs and begun the process of addressing the full council of overlords. The data from the engagement is distributed through the phylactery network, every moment of the battle shared, every tactical decision examined. The consensus that emerges is mixed. On one hand, the tomb's defenses performed adequately, the intruder was repelled, the tomb's integrity maintained. On the other hand, the cost was non-trivial. Hundreds of warriors destroyed, dozens of immortals damaged beyond quick repair, several Lichguard incapacitated, one overlord's body requiring extensive reconstruction. More concerning is the realization that the intruder could have won. In the brief moment after the Doomsday Blast, when both the Primarch and the Pharaon were down, if the Primarch's forces had arrived mere minutes earlier, they might have been able to extract their lord and deliver a killing blow to the Pharaon. If the Primarch had possessed just slightly more endurance, if his final strike had been positioned fractionally differently, the outcome might have been catastrophically different. The overlords debate whether to pursue the fleeing Imperials, to hunt down the Primarch and ensure his permanent destruction. Some argue that the threat he represents is too significant to ignore, that allowing such a formidable enemy to escape and potentially return is a strategic error. Others contend that the tomb's resources are better spent on full revival and consolidation, that chasing individual enemies across the stars serves no purpose when there are entire tomb worlds that remain dormant and vulnerable. In the end, the decision is made to focus on the tomb's awakening while maintaining heightened alert status. If the Primarch or his forces return, the tomb will be ready, fully awake, and at full strength. Additional overlords are awakened to bolster the command structure. Cryptechs begin the process of bringing ancient weapons online, technologies from the war in heaven that have not been used in 60 million years. The tomb transforms from a sleeping mausoleum into an active military installation, ready to defend itself against any threat. The Pharaon also makes a personal decision. It will remember this Primarch, will keep the memory of their duel in the forefront of its consciousness, in a way that it has not thought of any enemy in epochs. It considers this being a worthy opponent, someone who pushed it to the limits of its capabilities and nearly succeeded in destroying it. When next they meet, if they meet again, the Pharaon intends to be better prepared, to have studied the Primarch's fighting style, and developed counters for every technique, every tactic, every strategy. Days pass in the wider galaxy, though time has little meaning in the depths of the tomb. The Primarch slowly recovers, his superhuman constitution gradually winning the battle against his injuries. The damage is extensive enough that full recovery will take months, perhaps years, but he will recover. He is a Primarch after all, designed to survive things that would obliterate lesser beings. As consciousness fully returns and his mind clears from the fog of trauma, he begins the process of composing his report, of warning the Imperium about the threat he encountered on that dead world. The report, when it finally reaches the upper echelons of Imperial command, causes considerable concern. The Necrons, previously thought to be minor Xenos threats at best, are revealed to be something far more dangerous. A race that once ruled the galaxy, armed with technology that makes even the Imperium's most sacred relics look primitive, awakening from their long sleep and reclaiming their ancient domains. Strategic assessments are revised, resources allocated, entire chapters of Space Marines designated for Necron containment and destruction operations. But the Imperium is vast and slow to react, its bureaucracy measured in centuries rather than days or weeks. By the time any significant response is organized, the tomb world that the Primarch assaulted has completed its awakening. The Pharaon, now at the head of fully operational dynasty, begins the process of expanding its domain. Other tomb worlds in nearby systems are contacted through ancient communication networks, awakened where they still slumber, brought into the growing coalition. Slowly, inexorably, the Necron Empire begins its resurrection. The encounter between Primarch and Pharaon becomes something of a touchstone for both sides. For the Imperium, it represents the first true understanding of the Necron threat, the moment when these ancient Xenos transformed from curiosity to existential danger. For the Necrons, particularly for that specific dynasty, it becomes a defining moment. Proof that the current galaxy holds threats worthy of their attention and respect. In the grand sweep of history, in the annals kept by the historians and the archives maintained by the librarians, the battle will be recorded as a tactical withdrawal, a strategic retreat in the face of overwhelming odds. The Primarch's survival will be celebrated, his wounds held up as proof of the terrible nature of the Xenos threat. The Space Marines who died buying time for his extraction will be honored, their names inscribed in the rolls of martyrs who gave their lives in service to the Imperium. In the data tombs of the Necron dynasty, the encounter will be catalogued differently. The invasion repelled, the intruder driven off, the tomb's integrity maintained. A successful defensive operation, executed according to established protocols. But beneath that sterile description will be notes, observations, analyses compiled by the Pharaon and its cryptex. Notes about the Primarch's capabilities, about the strategic implications of such beings existing in significant numbers, about the necessity of developing specific countermeasures against future encounters. Both sides learn from this engagement. The Imperium begins to take the Necron threat seriously, to recognize that these are not simply ancient machines to be destroyed or salvaged for archaeotech, but a genuine civilization with capabilities that match or exceed humanity's own. New strategies are developed, new tactics tested, entire doctrines created specifically for engaging Necron forces. The knowledge comes at terrible cost, paid in the lives of explorers and soldiers who encounter tomb worlds expecting ancient ruins and finding instead awakening death. The Necrons, for their part, begin to pay more attention to the Imperium, to recognize these newcomers not as mere primitives to be swept aside, but as a force that warrants genuine strategic consideration. The Primarchs, in particular, become subjects of intense study. How many of these beings exist? What are their individual capabilities? Can they be killed permanently? Or do they possess some form of resurrection technology similar to the Necrons' own reanimation protocols? The questions drive research programs in tomb worlds across the galaxy, cryptex, exchanging data and theories, building comprehensive profiles of these new threats. The Primarch himself, once he has recovered sufficiently to resume his duties, finds that the encounter has changed him in subtle ways. He has always known, intellectually, that the galaxy contained threats beyond the Imperium's ability to easily counter. But knowing and experiencing are different things. To stand on that battlefield, to see the endless waves of warriors who could not die, To fight a commander whose experience spanned millions of years, to be brought to the edge of death by an enemy that operated according to principles he barely understood. All of this has left marks deeper than the scars on his flesh. He becomes more cautious in his strategic planning, more willing to accept retreat when a situation seems unwinnable, more focused on the long-term implications of the Necron awakening. Some of his brother Primarchs notice the change, remark upon it in private councils. The bold warrior who would charge into any battle with absolute confidence now sometimes hesitates, considers alternatives, weighs risks more carefully. Some see this as wisdom, a maturity born from hard experience. Others worry that the encounter has wounded him in ways that go beyond the physical, that some of his characteristic certainty has been shaken by coming face to face with an enemy he could not simply overpower. Back on the tomb world, the Pharaon has made modifications to its own form, incorporating lessons learned from the duel, additional redundancies in critical systems, improved armor over vulnerable junction points, enhanced combat subroutines specifically designed to counter the fighting style the Primarch employed. It drives its Lich Guard through new training protocols, simulations based on data from the encounter, preparing them for the day when they might face similar opponents. The entire dynasty adapts, evolves, prepares for a future where conflicts with beings of the Primarch's caliber might become routine rather than exceptional. The galaxy continues its slow spiral toward whatever fate awaits it, but the encounter on that tomb world has changed the trajectories of both involved parties. The Primarch carries knowledge of a threat that most of the Imperium does not yet fully comprehend, and the burden of knowing that even his considerable powers may not be sufficient against it. The Pharaon returns to its long-term planning with a new appreciation for the dangers the current epoch presents, and a determination to ensure its dynasty's survival against all threats, old and new alike. In the end, neither combatant achieved total victory. The Primarch survived, but failed to neutralize the tomb. The Pharaon drove off the intruder, but suffered damage that took significant resources to repair. Both emerged from the encounter with increased respect for their opponent and increased concern about future confrontations. In this, perhaps, there is a certain grim symmetry. Two beings, both products of genetic or technological engineering pushed to its limits, both created to be superior to normal life, both discovering that superiority is a relative concept when facing opponents who are equally exceptional in their own ways. The memory of that battle will linger for both of them, in the Primarch's organic neurons and the Pharaon's crystalline engrams. They will carry it through whatever conflicts await, whether they ever meet again or not. And somewhere in the cold mathematics that guide Necron strategic planning, a probability is calculated and recorded. The likelihood of future encounters between Primarchs and Necron Pharaons. The projected outcomes of such encounters under various scenarios. The resource costs of victory or defeat in each scenario. The numbers suggest that this was only the first of many such confrontations, that as the Necron awakening accelerates and the Imperium expands its anti-Xenos operations, these two forces will clash with increasing frequency. And in those future battles, both sides will draw upon the lessons learned here, on this barren world, in this first terrible meeting between humanity's greatest warriors and the ancient lords of the stars. For now, both the Primarch and the Pharaon turn to other concerns, other threats, other duties. But neither forgets, neither can forget. The battle is over, but its echoes will resound through both civilizations, shaping strategies and influencing decisions in ways both obvious and subtle. And when the historians of both races, human and Necron, look back on this era, they will mark this encounter as significant, as a turning point in the relationship between the two species. The tomb world settles into its new status as an active military installation, its warriors standing ready, its weapons primed, its sensors sweeping the void for any sign of returning threats. The Primarch returns to his legion, to his campaigns, to the Great Crusade or whatever epoch his presence falls within, carrying wounds both visible and invisible. The galaxy, indifferent to the concerns of both, continues its slow march toward whatever destiny awaits it, whether that be final victory for the Imperium, successful restoration of the Necron Empire, or something neither side has foreseen. In the grim darkness of the far future, such encounters will become more common, more desperate, more apocalyptic in their scope and consequences. This was merely the first. There will be others, many others. And each time a Primarch descends to a tomb world, each time ancient Necron nobility rises to face these demigods of humanity, the galaxy holds its breath and watches to see which of these titanically powerful forces will prove superior. The answer, as this first encounter demonstrated, is rarely simple, never certain, and always paid for in blood and metal, and the shattered remnants of those caught between such terrible powers. The weeks following the Primarch's withdrawal from the tomb world see changes rippling through both the Imperium and the awakening Necron dynasties. For the Primarch, recovery is a process that tests even his superhuman endurance. The apothecaries who tend him work day and night, applying every technique in their considerable arsenal, calling upon the expertise of the most skilled biologist adepts in the Imperium. Yet for all their efforts, for all their genecraft and surgical mastery, they find themselves confronting wounds that resist conventional treatment. The Gauss weapon strikes present particular challenges. These weapons operate on principles that violate everything the apothecaries understand about physics and biology. Where a las weapon burns and a bolt round tears, Gauss weaponry simply unmakes matter at the molecular level. The edges of these wounds do not heal normally because the cells there have been scattered to their component atoms, leaving gaps in the Primarch's tissue that his enhanced biology struggles to bridge. The apothecaries must carefully excise the damaged areas and encourage regrowth from healthy tissue, a process that would be agonizing for any normal being, but which the Primarch endures with stoic determination. The burns from Tesla weapons present their own complications. The electrical damage has created patterns of necrosis through muscle and nerve tissue, disrupting the careful neural architecture that makes a Primarch's reflexes so impossibly quick. Nerve conductivity is compromised in several areas, leading to moments of numbness or unexpected pain that the Primarch must learn to compensate for. The apothecaries assure him that with time, with the full resources of his enhanced healing, these issues will resolve themselves. But time is a luxury that Primarchs rarely possess. Most concerning are the deeper wounds, the ones that do not show on the surface. The Doomsday Blast, even caught obliquely rather than full-on, has done damage that goes beyond the merely physical. Some of the Primarch's organs show cellular changes that the apothecaries cannot fully explain. Alterations at the genetic level that suggest exposure to energies that should not exist in normal space-time. They monitor these changes carefully, taking tissue samples, running tests, comparing the results to baseline genetic templates. So far, the changes appear to be stabilizing rather than progressing, but the concern remains. Beyond the physical recovery lies the psychological impact. Primarchs are not prone to doubt in the way normal humans are. They were designed for certainty, for unwavering confidence in their own abilities and judgment. Yet the encounter on the tomb world has introduced something new into the Primarch's mental landscape. Not fear exactly. Primarchs do not experience fear as lesser beings do, but perhaps something adjacent to fear, an awareness of mortality, of fallibility, that sits uneasily alongside the genetically programmed assurance that has guided him through countless battles. He finds himself revisiting the battle in his mind during the long hours of recovery. Each decision, each movement, each strike and parry, analyzed with the cold precision that makes Primarchs such formidable strategic thinkers. Could he have done something differently? Should he have recognized the scale of the threat earlier and withdrawn before becoming so deeply engaged? Was there a moment, a single tactical decision, that could have changed the outcome entirely? The questions circle endlessly, without satisfying answers. His thoughts turned particularly to the Pharaon, to that moment when they stood locked in combat, demigod and deathless Xenos. He had fought many opponents who were his equal in raw power. He had stood against demon princes whose strength was borrowed from the warp itself, against Xenos warlords whose brutality and cunning had carved empires from the stars. But the Pharaon was different. It fought with a precision that spoke of millions of years of experience, of countless battles against enemies the Primarch could not even imagine. Every movement had been economical, every strike optimized, every tactic drawn from a well of knowledge so deep it might as well be bottomless. What troubled the Primarch most was the realization that the Pharaon had been operating at reduced capacity. The tomb was still waking, its systems coming online in stages, its forces marshalling gradually, rather than deploying all at once. What he had faced was a fraction of what the tomb could bring to bear. What would happen if a fully awakened tomb world, all its systems operational and all its forces deployed, decided to target Imperial holdings? The calculations he ran in his mind, drawing upon his genetically encoded tactical genius, suggested outcomes that were deeply troubling. The Imperium's strength lay in its numbers, in the countless billions of humans who could be mobilized for war, in the industrial might of forge worlds that could produce armaments on scales that beggared the imagination. But numbers meant little against an enemy that could not truly die, that could repair damage faster than it could be inflicted, that possessed technology capable of unmaking matter itself. And industrial capacity, however vast, could not compete with manufacturing systems that had been running for 60 million years. That drew upon resources harvested from stars and black holes and the spaces between dimensions. He dictates reports when his strength permits, speaking into recording devices tended by servitors who transcribe his words with mechanical precision. These reports will make their way through Imperial bureaucracy, climbing the chain of command until they reach whoever needs to see them. Some will be classified, restricted to the highest levels of strategic planning. Others will be distributed more widely, used to brief commanders who might find themselves facing Necron forces. The Primarch tries to be thorough, to communicate not just what happened, but why it matters, what it suggests about the nature of this ancient enemy. But he knows, with the cynicism that comes from long experience dealing with Imperial administration, that many who read these reports will not truly understand. They will see the words, will note the warnings, will perhaps even implement some changes to their strategic doctrines, but they will not grasp the existential nature of the threat, cannot comprehend what it means to face an enemy who ruled the galaxy when humanity's ancestors had not yet crawled from the seas. To them, the Necrons will remain simply another Xenos threat, more dangerous than some, perhaps, but ultimately just one more category in the endless catalogue of horrors that assail the Imperium from all sides. Meanwhile, on the Tomb World, the Pharaon's recovery proceeds according to its own rhythms. Where the Primarch's healing requires time and biological processes, the Pharaon's restoration is a matter of replacement and reconstruction. Damaged components are identified, fabricated in the tomb's foundries, installed by Canoptech spiders, whose manipulators can work at scales invisible to organic eyes. The process is efficient, methodical, devoid of the uncertainty that plagues biological healing. Yet the Pharaon finds itself experiencing something that might, in an organic being, be called contemplation. The battle has raised questions that its programming insists must be answered. Chief among these is the question of the Primarch himself. What was that being? The data suggests genetic engineering on a scale that rivals the Necrontyre's own biotechnological achievements at their height. The power output readings indicate physiological processes that should not be possible in organic matter. The combat capabilities observed exceed all parameters for baseline human performance by orders of magnitude. The Pharaon consults with its cryptechs, those among the Necron nobility who have retained enough individual consciousness to still pursue scientific understanding. Together, they analyze every moment of the encounter, examining the data from multiple perspectives, building models, and running simulations. They compare the Primarch to other threats in the Necron database, cross-referencing against records from the war in heaven, looking for analogues and precedents. What they find is troubling. The closest match in their records are the Old Ones themselves, those ancient enemies who sparked the wars that eventually led to the Necron Tire's transformation into the Necrons. The Old Ones had been masters of genetic manipulation, capable of crafting entire species to serve specific purposes. Their servant races, the Elder and the Krork and others, had been weapons as much as civilizations, designed to fight the Necrons and their Catan allies. Could these Primarchs be something similar? Had humanity somehow acquired Old One technology, or rediscovered principles that those ancient masters had used to create their most powerful servants? The implications are profound. If humanity possesses the capability to create beings of the Primarch's caliber, and if there are indeed multiple such beings as intelligence suggests, then they represent a threat that cannot be ignored or dismissed. The Pharaon must consider the possibility that humanity, primitive and scattered though it appears, might be the inheritor of something far more dangerous than their current technological level would suggest. Perhaps they are even the children of the Old Ones themselves, their genetic legacy diluted by countless generations, but still carrying echoes of that ancient power. The Pharaon orders expanded intelligence-gathering operations against Imperial holdings. Scoutcraft are dispatched to probe the edges of human-controlled space, to observe their worlds and ships, to gather data about their capabilities and dispositions. Particular attention is paid to any sightings of individuals matching the Primarch's description. Dimensions, power signatures, equipment configurations, anything that might help identify and categorize these beings. The information that returns is fragmentary but suggestive. There are indeed multiple such beings, each commanding their own forces, each unique in appearance and capability, but all sharing that same aura of superhuman capacity. Concurrently, the Pharaon begins preparations for potential future encounters. New weapon systems are brought online, technologies that had seemed unnecessary during the long sleep but now appear prudent. Gauss weaponry is upgraded with improved targeting algorithms, specifically calibrated for opponents with superhuman reflexes. Tesla weapons are reconfigured to produce wider areas of effect, reducing the chance that a highly mobile target can simply dodge their discharge. Doomsday cannons, already formidable, receive modifications that increase their firing rate at the expense of some per-shot power. Based on the observation that the Primarch proved capable of avoiding single massive strikes, but might be overwhelmed by rapid successive blasts, the Lich Guard and Immortals who survived the encounter are run through new training protocols. They practice coordinated strikes against targets moving at speeds derived from analysis of the Primarch's combat patterns. They train to maintain formation even when their comrades are being destroyed around them, to exploit momentary openings in an opponent's guard, to function as a cohesive unit rather than as individual warriors. The Pharaon knows that no amount of training can make a standard Necron warrior the equal of a Primarch in single combat. But properly coordinated, properly equipped, they might be able to slow such a being down, to inflict enough damage to create opportunities for heavier weapons, or for the Pharaon itself to engage. Yet for all this practical preparation, the Pharaon finds its thoughts returning to the Primarch with something that might be called respect. In all its long existence, spanning epochs beyond count, it has faced many enemies. Some were powerful, some were cunning, some were both. But few had fought with the sheer determination that the Primarch displayed. Even wounded, even facing impossible odds, even confronted with an enemy that could not be permanently destroyed through conventional means, the Primarch had not yielded. He had fought to the edge of death and beyond, had delivered strikes that came within a hair's breadth of destroying the Pharaon itself, had only been defeated by a combination of exhaustion and unfortunate circumstance, rather than by any fundamental inadequacy in his capabilities. This quality, this refusal to accept defeat, even when defeat seems inevitable, resonates with something buried deep in the Pharaon's psyche. Once, millions of years ago, it had been Necrontire, flesh and blood, and mortal. It had known passion and pride, had fought for causes it believed in, had refused to surrender even when the universe itself seemed arrayed against its people. The biotransference had burned away most of these feelings, had replaced them with cold logic and implacable purpose. But not quite all. Deep in the crystalline matrices that house its consciousness, fragments of that original personality persist, and those fragments recognize in the Primarch a kindred spirit, another being who defines himself through struggle and refuses to be broken by any adversity. The Pharaon does not share these thoughts with the other overlords. Such sentiments might be seen as weakness, as a dangerous anthropomorphization of the enemy that could lead to tactical errors. But it privately stores these observations in its personal database, flagged for future consideration. Perhaps, in some distant future, there might be room for something other than war between the Necrons and these Primarchs. Perhaps, under different circumstances, beings of such capability might find common cause rather than conflict. It is an unlikely scenario, bordering on the fantastical. But the Pharaon has learned, through millions of years of existence, that the unlikely is not the same as the impossible. Across the galaxy, in 100 different locations, other tomb worlds begin to wake. Some are roused by the ancient awakening schedules, programmed millions of years ago, and finally reaching their appointed activation times. Others are awakened by external stimuli, asteroid strikes that penetrate deep enough to trigger emergency systems, excavations by curious xenos or humans that breach sealed vaults, cosmic radiation from dying stars that disrupts stasis fields. Each awakening follows a similar pattern. First, the master programs activate, assessing the tomb's status and the state of the galaxy beyond. Then the Canoptech constructs come online, beginning repairs and preparing the facilities for the return of their masters. Finally, the Necrons themselves wake, from the lowest warriors to the mightiest overlords. And as they wake, many encounter the Imperium in one form or another. Some tomb worlds find themselves beneath human colonies, their sacred ground desecrated by cities and farms and industrial complexes. Others wake to find Imperial ships in orbit, explorator fleets seeking archaeotech or simply surveying systems for potential colonization. The initial encounters vary in their details, but share a common theme: violent confrontation as the newly awakened Necrons seek to reclaim what they view as their rightful territory, and the Imperials fight to hold or acquire what they believe is theirs by right of human expansion. Not all these encounters involve Primarchs, of course. Most are handled by more conventional Imperial forces, Imperial Guard regiments, Space Marine chapters, elements of the Imperial Navy. But word of the Necron threat spreads, reaching the ears of those who can mobilize such exceptional forces. And when a situation seems dire enough, when a tomb world proves too formidable for normal military assets to handle, the call goes out for intervention by one of the Emperor's genesons. One such call reaches a Primarch recovering from different wounds, earned in different battles, unaware of his brother's recent encounter. This Primarch, whose tactical specialty leans toward direct assault and overwhelming force, receives reports of a tomb world that has awakened in a sector critical to Imperial supply lines. Initial attempts to neutralize the threat have failed spectacularly. 3 separate battle groups have been lost, their ships torn apart by weapons that operate on principles Imperial tech priests cannot fathom. The forces that landed on the world's surface were systematically eradicated, their Vox communications cutting to static one by one as Gauss weapons unmade them at the molecular level. The Primarch reviews the intelligence with his characteristic thoroughness. He notes the descriptions of the enemy: skeletal warriors of living metal, weapons that disintegrate matter, vehicles that move through solid ground as easily as through air. He reads the few survivor accounts, listening to recordings made by desperate soldiers in their final moments. He watches pick captures from auto-savant drones that manage to transmit data before being destroyed. And he begins to formulate a plan. Unlike his wounded brother, this Primarch does not dismiss the Necrons as merely another Xenos threat. The evidence is too clear, the danger too obvious. These are foes that require respect, careful preparation, overwhelming force. He begins marshalling resources on a scale normally reserved for major crusade operations. Multiple Space Marine chapters are summoned, their battle barges converging on staging points around the target system. Imperial Guard regiments, by the dozens, are mobilized, their troop ships forming a vast armada that will darken the skies when they arrive. Titan legions are awakened from their slumber, the god machines walking for the first time in decades as their princeps prepare for war. Even elements of the Adeptus Mechanicus are recruited, tech priests who specialize in Xenos technology and might be able to provide insights into Necron systems. The preparation takes months, an eternity by the standards of normal military operations, but necessary given the scale of the threat. During this time, the Primarch studies everything known about the Necrons, reviewing reports from every encounter that has been documented. He notes patterns in their tactics, observes the consistency of their technologies across different tomb worlds, builds a mental model of how they operate and what their limitations might be. He pays particular attention to reports of their regeneration capability, to accounts of destroyed Necrons rising again to continue fighting. This is the key, he decides. This is what makes them so formidable and what any successful strategy must account for. His plan, when finalized, is characteristically direct. Overwhelming orbital bombardment to destroy as much of the surface infrastructure as possible, followed by massed landings at multiple points simultaneously. The goal is not to fight the Necrons in extended engagements where their regeneration gives them an advantage. Instead, the strategy focuses on rapid strikes against identified power sources and command nodes, destroying the tomb's ability to coordinate its defenses and power its resurrection systems. With those systems offline, the Necrons become much more vulnerable, reducible to just another Xenos threat, rather than an existential danger. The assault begins with a violence that lights up the void like a newborn sun. Hundreds of ships unleash their weapons simultaneously, lance batteries and nova cannons and cyclonic torpedoes, all fired in coordinated salvos, designed to saturate the tomb world's defenses. The Primarch watches from the command throne of his flagship, his superhuman mind processing the flood of data from targeting servitors and scanning arrays. He sees the tomb world's shields activate, exotic energy barriers that shimmer into existence around identified population centers and critical structures. He watches as some weapons are deflected harmlessly, their destructive potential absorbed or redirected by technologies that make a mockery of Imperial understanding. But some blasts get through, and where they strike, destruction blooms. The surface installations begin to break apart under the sustained barrage. Defensive batteries that had weathered 60 million years of dormancy shatter under the impact of cyclonic torpedoes. Communication spires, still in the process of fully activating, are cut down by lance fire that boils the metal they're constructed from. The shields prove formidable but not impervious, and the sheer weight of fire being directed at them eventually creates gaps and weak points that subsequent salvos can exploit. Yet even as the bombardment proceeds, the Primarch sees evidence that the tomb is responding. From hidden launch bays scattered across the planet's surface, Necron aircraft begin to emerge. Doom scythes and night scythes, their sleek forms flickering in and out of phase as they ascend through atmosphere into the void beyond. They move with impossible agility, their inertialess drives allowing maneuvers that would turn any human pilot's organs to jelly. Their weapons, Tesla destructor arrays and death rays, begin to pick apart the Imperial ships with surgical precision. The void battle that ensues is like nothing the Imperial forces have experienced. The Necron ships, few in number compared to the Imperial Armada, nonetheless prove to be formidable opponents. They phase through incoming fire, repositioning at speeds that should not be possible, their weapons carving through Imperial void shields and armor plate with contemptuous ease. The Primarch watches as an entire frigate squadron is annihilated in seconds, death rays punching through their hulls and detonating their plasma reactors in cascading explosions. He adjusts his strategy accordingly, redeploying his forces to present harder targets, concentrating fire on individual Necron craft to overwhelm even their superior defensive capabilities. Below, on the Tomb World's surface, the real war is beginning. Drop pods rain down by the thousands, each carrying a complement of Space Marines or their specialized equipment. Some are destroyed in transit, picked off by ground-based Tesla batteries, or intercepted by Necron aircraft. But enough make it through, enough that when the first wave hits, it does so with tremendous force. Space Marines emerge from their pods firing, bolters and plasma weapons and melter guns all speaking in a thunderous cacophony. They advance immediately, not pausing to consolidate their positions, but instead moving with the aggressive momentum that defines their combat doctrine. The Necrons are waiting for them. Warriors and Immortals, already active and deployed in defensive positions, open fire as soon as the Space Marines come into range. Gauss weapons light up the battlefield, emerald beams crisscrossing through the air, stripping away ceramite armor and the flesh beneath. Space Marines fall. Their superhuman durability meaningless against weapons that unmake matter itself. But they are not the mindless warriors of the Imperium. They adapt, use terrain, coordinate their fire, focus on targets one at a time, rather than trying to engage the entire Necron line simultaneously. Behind this initial assault wave, heavier forces are deploying. Dreadnoughts, ancient warriors entombed in walking sarcophagi, stride forward with weapons blazing. Predator tanks and land raiders rumble across the broken ground, their heavy weapons adding their voice to the battle. Terminator squads teleport directly into identified strongpoints, their tactical dreadnought armor proof against all but the most focused Necron fire, their storm bolters and assault cannons shredding warriors and even Immortals with sustained bursts. And amidst it all, coordinating everything through a combination of Vox channels and his own genetically enhanced awareness, the Primarch himself takes to the field. He does not direct this battle from the safety of an orbiting command ship. That is not how Primarchs wage war. He stands on the ground, surrounded by his most elite warriors, and leads from the front as he was designed to do. His presence alone is worth an army, his tactical genius ensuring that every force is positioned optimally, every assault timed for maximum effect, every resource deployed where it will do the most good. The Necrons, for their part, defend their tomb with the same implacable efficiency they bring to all their endeavors. Where Space Marines seek to break through their lines, Lich-Guard phase into existence to block the advance, their dispersion shields catching incoming fire while their hyperphase swords carve through power armor. Where Imperial armor concentrates, destroyers and heavy destroyers float forward to meet them, Gauss cannons and heavy Gauss cannons, reducing even land raiders to constituent atoms. And overseeing it all, coordinating through the phylactery network, just as the Primarch coordinates through his own channels, the Tomb's overlords direct their forces with tactical skill honed over millions of years. The battle rages for hours, then days. Positions are taken and lost and retaken. Imperial forces push forward, breaching outer defenses, fighting through corridors carved from living metal that shifts and reconfigures around them. Necron forces counterattack, warriors that were destroyed in earlier fighting rising again to rejoin the battle. Their reanimation protocols restoring them even as the fighting continues around their bodies. Casualties mount on both sides, though the meaning of casualties is different for each. For the Imperium, each space marine that falls represents an irreplaceable loss. These warriors take decades to create, centuries to train to full capability. Their gene seed must be recovered by apothecaries, preserved for future generations. But even with that recovery, the chapter is diminished by each death. The Imperial Guard fares even worse. Whole regiments are wiped out in minutes when they encounter concentrated Necron fire. Tens of thousands of soldiers reduced to their component atoms, their sacrifice buying only incremental advances toward objectives that seem to recede even as they are approached. For the Necrons, losses are temporary inconveniences. A destroyed warrior can be repaired and returned to service, its consciousness core intact and functional. Even if damage is severe enough to overwhelm on-site reanimation protocols, the destroyed unit can be teleported back to the tomb's repair facilities, where Canoptech Constructs will rebuild it from stored templates. Only if a Necron is damaged so catastrophically that its engram is destroyed or scattered beyond recovery is the loss truly permanent. And the Imperials lack weapons capable of inflicting such comprehensive destruction in sufficient quantities. This fundamental imbalance means that despite the Imperium's numerical advantage, despite the overwhelming force the Primarch has brought to bear, the outcome remains uncertain. Every meter forward costs lives that cannot be replaced, while the enemy they fight against simply repairs itself and continues the battle. The Primarch recognizes this dynamic, has planned for it. The key is not to destroy every Necron on this world. That would be impossible. The key is to find and destroy the systems that power their resurrection, to sever the tomb's ability to sustain its forces. Do that, and the Necrons become mortal. Do that, and the tide of battle can turn decisively. His forces push deeper into the tomb, following maps constructed from captured intelligence and seismic surveys conducted during the initial bombardment. They seek the power cores, the master systems, the cryptechs and overlords who coordinate the defense. And they find resistance that grows more desperate and more capable the deeper they penetrate. The Necrons are fighting not just to repel an invasion now. They are fighting for their very survival, and they bring forth weapons and technologies that have not been seen since the war in heaven itself. Citan shards, fragments of the star gods who once ruled the Necrons before the slaves turned on their masters, are released from their tesseract prisons. These beings, each one a sliver of cosmic power bound in adamantium and necrodermis, take to the battlefield with capabilities that defy description. They walk through walls and ignore gravity, exist partially outside normal space-time, wield powers that make a mockery of physical laws. Space Marines who engage them find their weapons are useless, their tactics meaningless, their enhanced physiology no protection against attacks that operate on fundamental levels of reality. The Primarch witnesses one of these shards in action and immediately recognizes it as a threat beyond normal parameters. This is not merely advanced technology. This is something else entirely, something that touches on the warp without being of the warp, something that suggests powers and principles the Imperium has no framework for understanding. He diverts his most elite forces to contain it, throwing Terminators and Dreadnoughts, and even several Titans, against this single enemy, accepting terrible losses to keep it from breaking through to his main forces. Yet even as the Primarch commits these resources, even as he makes the hard choices about what must be sacrificed to achieve victory, he cannot help but feel a growing sense of desperation creeping into his calculations. This is supposed to be overwhelming force. This is supposed to be the strategy that works, that turns the tide against the Necron threat through sheer concentration of military might. But the tomb world continues to fight, continues to resist, continues to deploy new horrors from its ancient arsenals. And his forces, formidable though they are being ground down by attrition against an enemy that does not have the decency to stay dead. In the deepest levels of the tomb, in chambers that have not been breached since they were first sealed 60 million years ago. The Pharaon of this world makes its own calculations. The invaders have proven more capable than initial projections suggested. Their commander, that massive figure whose presence on the battlefield resonates like a beacon to every Necron sensor system, coordinates their efforts with skill that rivals the Pharaon's own. The assault has already penetrated deeper than should have been possible, has destroyed systems that will take decades to properly repair, has inflicted casualties that, while not permanent, are nonetheless significant in their disruption of the tomb's full awakening sequence. The Pharaon considers its options with the cold logic of pure calculation. Victory is still possible, even probable. The tomb's defenses remain largely intact, the bulk of its forces are still operational, and the invaders, for all their capability, are suffering losses they cannot sustain indefinitely. But that victory will come at a cost that grows with every hour of continued combat. Better to act decisively now, to commit forces that have been held in reserve, to deploy technologies that had seemed unnecessary but now appear prudent. Orders flow through the phylactery network with the speed of thought. Wake the Triarch Praetorians, activate the monolith, release the final Citan shard from its imprisonment, bring the full weight of the dynasty to bear on these invaders. Accept no outcome except their complete eradication. The tomb responds to these commands with mechanical precision, systems that have waited millions of years for their moment finally unleashing their full potential. On the surface, the battlefield transforms as fresh Necron forces join the battle. Triarch Praetorians, warriors loyal to the ancient Triarch rather than to individual dynasties, phase into reality across multiple locations. These are not the mindless warriors or even the limited immortals. These are Necrons who retain significant portions of their original personalities, who fight not out of programming, but out of genuine loyalty to ancient codes and principles. They engage the Imperial forces with tactics that speak of true strategic understanding, coordinating with each other and with the defending warriors and immortals to create interlocking fields of fire that no amount of power armor can stand against for long. The monolith, a massive floating pyramid of living metal, rises from deep within the tomb's structure. It phases through solid stone as though it were water, emerging onto the battlefield like a dark god from some pre-human mythology. Its particle whip sweeps across Imperial positions, and where it touches, armored vehicles simply cease to exist. Their matter unmade and absorbed into the monolith's systems to fuel its continued operations. Space Marines charge the edifice with melter bombs and power fists, seeking to bring it down through concentrated close-range assault. But it merely activates its Eternity Gate. And from that portal emerge fresh squads of warriors, teleporting directly from the tomb's depths to wherever the monolith positions itself. And the Citan shard, freed from its prison and unleashed upon the battlefield, begins to wreak havoc on a scale that defies comprehension. This particular fragment embodies aspects of the Burning One, that Citan who feasted on solar fire and wielded flames that could consume reality itself. It walks through Imperial positions, leaving trails of burning nothingness, its very presence warping the laws of physics in its immediate vicinity. Titans, those god machines of the Adeptus Mechanicus, turn their weapons on it and watch as their volcano cannons and plasma annihilators are simply absorbed, the Citan feeding on the energy and growing stronger. The Primarch sees his carefully constructed strategy beginning to unravel. The forces he committed to containing the first Citan shard are still engaged there, unable to disengage without being annihilated. The fresh enemy reinforcements have blunted his advance toward the tomb's power cores. The monolith is systematically dismantling his armored support, and now this new Citan shard threatens to break his entire front line, to punch through to his command elements and decapitate the entire operation. For the first time in this campaign, he confronts the possibility not just of tactical failure, but of complete strategic defeat. He makes his decision with the speed that only a Primarch can manage. processing options and outcomes in the span of a heartbeat. The operation must be terminated. Further commitment of forces will only result in greater losses with no guarantee of success. A fighting withdrawal, covered by the fleet's guns, preserving what can be preserved while inflicting maximum damage on the enemy during the retreat. It is not victory. It is not even really an honorable stalemate. It is defeat, pure and simple, but defeat chosen deliberately to prevent something worse. The orders go out, and the Imperial forces begin their pullback. It is a masterstroke of tactical coordination, of the kind that only forces led by a Primarch can execute. Fighting positions are abandoned in sequence, with each withdrawal covered by suppressing fire from the next position back. Armored units reverse course under smoke cover, their heavy weapons continuing to fire even as they retreat. Space Marines form rearguard lines, holding against the pursuing Necrons for precious seconds before falling back themselves, leapfrogging from position to position in a disciplined withdrawal that prevents the retreat from becoming a rout. The Primarch himself is the last to leave the surface, his personal guard forming a perimeter, while extraction craft land to recover the command elements. He stands on the ramp of his Thunderhawk gunship, watching as the last of his forces pull back, marking the positions of every squad, accounting for every unit. He cannot save them all. Some are too deep in the tomb complex to reach in time. Others are cut off by Necron forces that have predicted the retreat and moved to block escape routes. He watches as their Vox signals wink out one by one, each extinction a small death in his superhuman heart. Then he is airborne, the Thunderhawk's engines screaming as it climbs for orbit, and below him the tomb world recedes. From this altitude, he can see the full scope of the battle, the crater fields left by orbital bombardment, the burning wreckage of vehicles and aircraft scattered across kilometers of scorched ground, the green lightning of Gauss weapons still firing at his retreating forces, and everywhere, the skeletal forms of Necron warriors advancing, reclaiming ground they had been forced to yield, restoring their positions as though the entire Imperial assault had been nothing but a temporary inconvenience. The fleet begins its own withdrawal as soon as he reaches flagship. Ships that had been pounding the tomb world from orbit turn and burn, their plasma drives pushing them away from the gravity well, seeking the minimum safe distance to transition to warp travel. Some are too slow, caught by Necron fighters that phase into reality around them, tearing into their hulls with weapons that ignore void shields and armor alike. The Primarch watches these deaths through remote viewing systems, each loss catalogued, each sacrifice noted. They are falling back, yes, but they are making the enemy pay for every meter of ground reclaimed, and then they are clear, transitioning into the warp with the gut-wrenching lurch that even Primarchs can feel, the tomb world left behind in real space. The fleet limps toward the closest Imperial holdings, ships that had entered the system proudly now, trailing debris and venting atmosphere, their crews working frantically to patch holes and restore damaged systems. The Primarch moves through his flagship, inspecting the wounded, speaking with commanders, already beginning the process of assessing what went wrong and what can be learned. The casualties are horrific. 3 Space Marine chapters have been effectively destroyed as fighting forces, their numbers reduced below the threshold where they can function as independent operational units. Dozens of Imperial Guard regiments have been annihilated entirely, their names to be added to the endless rolls of units lost in service to the Emperor. Several Titans were left behind, their crews dead or captured, the god machines themselves fallen and perhaps already being studied by curious cryptechs. And for all this sacrifice, for all this blood and treasure spent, the tomb world remains firmly in Necron hands, its defenses battered but intact, its forces already beginning the process of repairing the damage and restoring full operational status. Back on the tomb world, the Pharaon surveys the battlefield with its own form of satisfaction. The invaders have been repelled, the tomb's integrity is maintained. True, there has been damage. True, repairs will be necessary. True, the encounter has demonstrated that the current iteration of humanity possesses military capabilities that exceed previous assessments, but these are acceptable costs, lessons learned that will inform future defensive strategies. The Pharaon issues new orders through the phylactery network. Increase perimeter defenses. Deploy additional sensor arrays to detect approaching threats from greater distances. Accelerate the awakening of reserve forces to ensure the tomb can respond to multiple simultaneous assaults. And most importantly, share all combat data with nearby tomb worlds. Allow the other dynasties to learn from this engagement. Ensure that the network of awakening Necron civilizations grows stronger and more coordinated with each confrontation. The Satan shards are returned to their tesseract prisons, bound once again by technologies that can contain even fragments of stellar gods. The Triarch Praetorians withdraw to their own chambers, their duty fulfilled for now. The monolith phases back into the depths of the tomb, its particle whip powered down, its eternity gates sealed. And across the battlefield, Canoptech constructs emerge to begin the work of cleaning up, recycling destroyed warriors and immortals, repairing damaged infrastructure, erasing the scars of battle as though the massive Imperial assault had never occurred. Two Primarchs have now faced the Necron threat directly, and both have been forced to withdraw, defeated not through inferior skill or courage, but simply through the fundamental asymmetry of fighting an enemy that cannot truly die. Word of these encounters spreads through both civilizations, though the details differ based on who's telling the story. In the Imperium, the battles are framed as tactical withdrawals, as necessary retreats in the face of overwhelming Xenos threat that will inform future, more successful campaigns. The Primarchs themselves are not blamed, their tactical acumen and personal valor emphasized even as the outcomes are acknowledged as setbacks. Among the Necrons, the encounters are recorded with typical precision, but also with a note of respect. These Primarchs represent a level of individual capability that the Necrons had not anticipated from the current galactic civilizations. The data from both engagements is shared among awakening tomb worlds, studied by cryptechs who specialize in threat assessment and military analysis. Strategies are developed for dealing with such opponents in future encounters. Technologies are proposed that might counter their specific advantages. The Necron dynasties, fragmented though they currently are, begin to recognize that the Imperium, and specifically these Primarchs, represent a threat that merits genuine attention. Yet for all the tactical analysis, for all the strategic planning and resource allocation, something more fundamental has occurred through these encounters. Two civilizations, separated by millions of years of history and fundamentally different in their very nature, have taken each other's measure. The Imperium has learned that the Necrons are not simply ancient ruins to be plundered or primitive Xenos to be crushed. They are a resurgent empire with technology and capabilities that rival or exceed humanity's own. The Necrons have learned that the current galactic order is not simply a collection of upstart primitives squabbling over the ruins of their betters, but includes beings of genuine capability who must be treated as legitimate threats rather than mere annoyances. The weeks and months following these encounters see both civilizations adapting their strategies and doctrines based on hard-won lessons. Within the upper echelons of Imperial command, reports from both Primarchs are carefully analyzed, their implications debated in councils that span days of continuous deliberation. The Lords of Terror, those ancient and mysterious figures who govern the Imperium in the Emperor's name, recognize that the Necron awakening represents a shift in the galaxy's balance of power. Decisions must be made about how to allocate resources, which threats to prioritize, how to respond to an enemy that conventional military doctrine seems poorly equipped to handle. Some among the Imperial leadership argue for immediate and overwhelming response. Send crusade fleets to every suspected tomb world. Sterilize them from orbit before they can fully awaken. Deploy exterminatus-grade weapons if necessary. Accept the loss of potentially habitable worlds in exchange for eliminating the Necron threat while it remains manageable. Better to rule over dead rocks than to risk the resurrection of an empire that once controlled the entire galaxy. These hawks find support among those commanders who have read the Primarch's reports, who understand the magnitude of what the Necrons represent. Others counsel a more measured approach. The Imperium is already stretched dangerously thin, fighting on thousands of fronts against enemies that range from chaos incursions to orc crusades to tyrannid hive fleets. Committing massive resources to a preventive war against the Necrons would mean weakening defenses elsewhere, creating opportunities for other enemies to exploit. Better to monitor suspected tomb worlds, intervene when they become active threats, but avoid the kind of total mobilization that the Hawks propose. Let the Necrons awaken if they must, but fight them only where they directly threaten Imperial interests. The debate rages through the usual channels of Imperial governance, slowed by the sheer bureaucratic inertia of an empire that spans the galaxy. Months pass while committees deliberate, while data is analyzed and reanalyzed, while political factions maneuver for advantage. In the meantime, on the front lines, local commanders must make their own decisions about how to handle Necron encounters, often with incomplete information and insufficient resources. Some take aggressive stances, launching preemptive strikes against tomb worlds, showing signs of activation. Others adopt defensive postures, fortifying their positions and waiting to see what the awakening Necrons will do. The Primarchs themselves, those who have directly faced the Necron threat, become advocates for a new understanding of warfare against this particular enemy. They share their experiences with their brother Primarchs, describing in vivid detail what it means to fight against foes who cannot die, who wield weapons that unmake reality, who possess technology that makes the Imperium's most advanced achievements seem primitive. Some Primarchs listen with the kind of attention such reports deserve. Others dismiss the concerns, confident in their own abilities, and certain that their particular tactical approach would succeed where their brothers failed. One Primarch, whose specialty is infiltration and rapid strike operations, proposes an alternative strategy entirely. Instead of attempting to destroy tomb worlds through direct assault, why not sabotage them before they fully awaken? Send small teams of elite operatives to infiltrate dormant tombs, plant explosives or viral tech plagues that will corrupt their systems, create cascade failures that will prevent proper revival. It's the kind of asymmetric warfare that his legion excels at, and he argues passionately that it represents the Imperium's best chance of managing the Necron threat without committing to ruinous wars of attrition. The plan finds traction among some Imperial strategists, who see in it an approach that plays to humanity's strengths rather than accepting battle on the Necrons' terms. Specialized teams are formed, drawing upon the most skilled infiltrators and saboteurs the Imperium can muster. They are equipped with the finest stealth technology available, given training in how to recognize Necron systems and vulnerabilities, briefed on the limited intelligence about tomb world architecture and security protocols. And then they are dispatched to target sites across the galaxy, sent to attempt what seems impossible, to sabotage sleeping giants before they wake. Some of these operations succeed, at least partially. Teams manage to penetrate tomb complexes, plant their charges, withdraw before being detected. Explosions deep within the tombs destroy power conduits or data repositories, delay awakenings, or corrupt revival protocols. In a few cases, entire tomb complexes are rendered inoperable, their systems so thoroughly disrupted that they cannot complete their awakening sequences. These successes are celebrated, proof that humanity's ingenuity and adaptability can triumph even against technologically superior foes. But many more operations end in disaster. Tomb worlds prove to have security measures that even the most skilled infiltrators cannot bypass. Canoptech constructs, programmed to respond to intrusions even when their masters sleep, detect the saboteurs, and eliminate them with mechanical efficiency. Some teams make it deep into tomb complexes, only to trigger awakening sequences prematurely, finding themselves trapped in corridors filling with emerging Necron warriors. A few simply vanish, their vox transmissions cutting to silence, their fates unknown but easily guessed. The tomb worlds are not undefended, and they do not appreciate being disturbed. On the Necron side, these sabotage attempts are noted and studied. The Pharaons and Cryptex, who analyze the intrusion attempts, recognize them as a sophisticated threat, evidence that humanity has adapted its strategy in response to early encounters. Tomb security protocols are updated, new detection systems deployed, additional canoptech constructs assigned to patrol duties even during dormancy. The sabotage campaign, initially promising, begins to see diminishing returns as the Necrons implement countermeasures. Yet the very fact that humanity is attempting such operations, that it recognizes the Necron threat as serious enough to warrant creative approaches, is itself significant. The Necrons have faced many enemies over their long existence. Some relied purely on brute force, throwing bodies and firepower at problems until they were solved or became unsolvable. Others used cunning, seeking to outthink and outmaneuver their opponents. Humanity, it seems, is capable of both approaches and willing to switch between them as circumstances demand. This adaptability marks them as a worthy adversary, one that cannot be dismissed or underestimated. The Pharaons begin to communicate with each other more regularly, using the ancient communication networks that link tomb worlds across the galaxy. Information is shared about Imperial tactics and capabilities. Data from successful defenses is distributed, analyzed, incorporated into updated defensive protocols. Slowly, despite the fractures that separate different dynasties and the old rivalries that date back millions of years, a kind of coordination emerges among the awakening Necrons. Not unity exactly. The different dynasties retain their distinct identities and agendas, but a recognition that the current galaxy presents threats that require cooperation, at least to some degree. This nascent coordination manifests in various ways. When Imperial forces assault one tomb world, nearby tomb worlds send what aid they can, providing intelligence about Imperial capabilities, or even dispatching military forces if proximity allows. Cryptex share research findings, working together to develop new technologies or resurrect old ones that might prove useful against current enemies. Overlords, who had planned to pursue independent agendas, begin to consider how their actions might affect the broader Necron community, recognizing that excessive individualism in the face of existential threats serves no one's interests. The Silent King, Sarek, observes these developments with something approaching approval. His return to the galaxy was motivated by concern about the tyrannid threat, but he has come to recognize that the Necrons face dangers from multiple quarters. The Imperium, with its Primarchs and its vast resources, represents one such danger. Better that the dynasties learn to work together now, while the threat is still manageable, than wait until coordination becomes impossible due to overwhelming enemy action. He operates mostly through intermediaries, not yet ready to reveal his presence and reclaim open leadership, but his influence can be felt in the increasing coherence of Necron strategic planning. Individual encounters between Imperial forces and awakening tomb worlds continue to occur across the galaxy, each one a small war unto itself. Some end in Imperial victory, tomb worlds destroyed or neutralized before they can fully revive. Others end in Necron triumph, Imperial expeditions annihilated, and their worlds added to the growing territories claimed by the resurgent dynasties. Most fall somewhere in between, inconclusive engagements where both sides achieve partial objectives and withdraw to prepare for future rounds. Through all of this, the Primarchs remain the wildcards, the factors that can tip any engagement in unpredictable directions. When a Primarch takes personal command of an anti-Necron operation, the probability of success increases dramatically. Their tactical genius, their personal combat capability, their ability to inspire extraordinary performance from their troops, all of these factors stack to create outcomes that normal commanders could not achieve. But they are also finite resources. There are only so many Primarchs, Only so many places they can be at once, only so much of their attention that can be devoted to any single threat. Some Primarchs develop specializations in anti-Necron warfare, studying the enemy intensively and crafting tactics specifically designed to counter their advantages. They learn to target power sources and command nodes rather than trying to destroy every warrior. They develop techniques for disrupting resurrection protocols, creating dead zones where destroyed Necrons cannot easily revive. They train their forces in rapid strike operations that minimize exposure to Gauss weapons and Tesla technology. These specialists become the go-to commanders when particularly dangerous tomb worlds activate, their expertise valued precisely because it is so hard-won. Other Primarchs remain focused on different threats, viewing the Necrons as just one enemy among many, and refusing to specialize in ways that might limit their broader utility. They fight Necron forces when they encounter them, adapt their tactics as necessary, but do not make the same intensive study that the specialists do. This division of focus becomes another source of debate within Imperial strategic circles. Should all Primarchs be trained in anti-Necron operations? Or is it better to maintain tactical flexibility by avoiding over-specialization? The debate is complicated by the simple fact that each Primarch is, to some degree, independent. They are not tools to be deployed at will by the Lords of Terror. They are the Emperor's sons, with their own command structures and spheres of authority. They can be asked, can be persuaded, can be convinced through argument and evidence. But they cannot simply be ordered to adopt particular tactical focuses or strategic priorities. This independence, often a strength that allows for creative problem-solving and adaptability, becomes a source of friction when coordination across multiple fronts requires unified approach. Time passes, measured not in days or months, but in years and decades. The Necron awakening accelerates, more tomb worlds reviving with each passing year. The Imperium's response evolves, doctrine updated based on accumulated experience, new weapons and tactics developed specifically for fighting this particular enemy. Casualties mount on both sides, though the meaning of casualties remains fundamentally different for organic life and post-organic existence. Entire sectors of space become contested territory, neither fully Imperial nor fully Necron, their status shifting with each campaign and counter-campaign. Through it all, the Primarchs who first encountered the Necron threat carry the memories of those battles. The wounds have healed, at least the physical ones, but the psychological impact remains. They have seen an enemy that cannot be defeated through conventional means, that possesses technology beyond Imperial understanding, that represents not just another Xenos threat, but a challenge to humanity's entire position in the galaxy. Some find this knowledge motivating, a spur to greater effort and innovation. Others find it weighing on them, a burden of understanding that their peers who have not faced similar challenges cannot fully share. The Pharons, for their part, maintain their own memories of these encounters, stored in crystalline engrams that cannot degrade or distort with time. They review the battles periodically, seeking new insights, looking for patterns they might have missed in the immediate aftermath. Some come to respect individual Primarchs, recognizing in them qualities that resonate with their own long-ago experiences as flesh and blood. Others see them purely as threats to be neutralized, obstacles to the restoration of the Necron Empire that must be removed by whatever means necessary. In the war rooms of both civilizations, strategic maps show the shifting frontiers of control and influence. Tomb worlds marked in one color, Imperial territories in another, contested zones in a third. Analysts on both sides study these maps, project future trends, calculate probabilities of various outcomes. The mathematics are complex, involving countless variables and unknowable factors. But certain patterns emerge from the chaos of data. The Necron awakening is inevitable and unstoppable. Too many tomb worlds exist for the Imperium to preemptively destroy them all. The best humanity can hope for is to slow the process, to buy time for adaptation and preparation, to ensure that when the full might of the Necron Empire returns, it finds itself facing an Imperium strong enough and unified enough to resist. This is the strategic calculation that drives imperial policy, the recognition that total victory is impossible and that the best achievable outcome is a kind of armed coexistence punctuated by periodic conflict. The Necrons face their own strategic challenges. Their empire is fragmented, divided among dynasties that remember ancient grievances and pursue competing agendas. The Silent King's attempt to unify them proceeds slowly, hampered by the very independence he once granted, and the millions of years of separate development that followed. The Imperium, primitive though it may be in technological terms, possesses numbers and industrial capacity that cannot be simply dismissed. And other threats loom. The Tyranids that drove the Silent King back to the galaxy, the Chaos entities that operate according to rules the Necrons find alien and disturbing, the Orcs, whose crude vitality defies all predictions. In this context, the encounters between Primarchs and Necron nobility become microcosms of the larger conflict. Each battle is not just a fight for territory or resources, but a test of capabilities, a probe of strengths and weaknesses, a data point in the ongoing strategic calculation. Every Primarch who survives an encounter with Necron gains knowledge that makes future encounters less dangerous. Every Pharaon who defends against Imperial assault learns lessons that can be applied across the dynasty. The war is not just fought with weapons and soldiers, but with information and adaptation, each side constantly evolving in response to what the other presents. Some encounters become legendary on both sides. A particular Primarch who managed to actually destroy a Pharaon through a combination of tactical brilliance and extraordinary luck. A Cryptek who developed a weapon specifically calibrated to disrupt Primarch physiology based on data collected from earlier battles. A tomb world that held against a crusade force for months. Its defenders showing tactical creativity that surprised even experienced Imperial commanders. A Space Marine chapter that discovered a vulnerability in standard Necron warriors and exploited it to devastating effect before the Necrons adapted their designs. These stories spread through both civilizations, told and retold, sometimes embellished, occasionally entirely fabricated. They serve functions beyond simple entertainment. For the Imperium, they demonstrate that the Necrons can be fought and sometimes beaten, that humanity is not helpless before this ancient threat. For the Necrons, they illustrate the capabilities and determination of their enemies, reinforcing the need for careful planning and thorough preparation. Both sides use these narratives to train their forces, to illustrate tactical principles, to build morale or instill appropriate caution. In the academies where future Imperial Guard officers are trained, instructors use case studies from Necron encounters to teach lessons about asymmetric warfare and the importance of understanding enemy capabilities. In the fortresses, where Space Marine neophytes learn the arts of war, veterans who fought against Necrons share their experiences, describe what it feels like to fight an enemy who resurrects after being destroyed. In the strategy chambers where chapter masters and lord generals plan campaigns, models of tomb world defenses are studied with the intensity usually reserved for fortress worlds. Among the Necrons, the equivalent processes occur. Crypteks compile databases of Imperial tactics and technologies, cross-referencing observations from hundreds of encounters to build comprehensive profiles of different Imperial forces. Overlords practice command protocols in simulations based on actual battles, learning to coordinate their warriors and immortals against enemies who can adapt and think creatively. Lichguard train in formations specifically designed to counter Space Marine assault tactics. The Necrons may be ancient, but they are not static. They learn, they adapt, they evolve their approaches, just as any rational strategic entity must. The galaxy watches these developments with varying degrees of concern and interest. The Elder, who remember the Necrons from the war in heaven, recognize the threat, and sometimes intervene in their own subtle ways, sabotaging tomb worlds or providing cryptic warnings to Imperial forces. The orcs mostly see more enemies to fight and charge in with their usual enthusiasm, caring little about the deeper implications. The Tau, newcomers to the galactic stage, encounter Necrons and add this data to their growing understanding of the cosmos's dangers. The Tyranids, driven by hunger rather than strategy, avoid Necron tomb worlds when possible, their hive minds calculating that the biomass to be gained is not worth the resistance to be faced. And through it all, the conflicts between Primarchs and Pharaons continue, each encounter another thread in the vast tapestry of war that defines this era. Some end in clear victory for one side or the other. Most end in the kind of ambiguous outcomes that characterize modern warfare, where tactical success and strategic failure can coexist, where Pyrrhic victories feel like defeats and managed retreats like triumphs. The only certainty is that there will be more encounters, more battles, more tests of will and capability between humanity's greatest warriors and the awakening lords of the stars. In the quiet moments between campaigns, those rare instances when violence pauses and reflection becomes possible, some among both civilizations wonder about the future. Can these conflicts ever end in anything other than mutual destruction? Is there any scenario where the Imperium and the Necron dynasties could coexist, dividing the galaxy between them rather than fighting endlessly for control? Or is the galaxy simply too small for both civilizations to flourish, making this war one of ultimate survival, where only one side can emerge victorious? These questions have no easy answers. The Imperium is built on the principle of human supremacy, on the belief that the galaxy belongs to mankind, and that all Xenos are either obstacles to be removed or resources to be exploited. The Necrons remember a time when they ruled unchallenged, when the very stars themselves bent to their will, and see no reason why they should accept anything less than the restoration of that ancient glory. Between these two positions, compromise seems impossible, and yet the costs of eternal war mount with each passing year. Some Primarchs, particularly those who have faced the Necrons directly, begin to entertain thoughts that would be heretical if voiced openly. Perhaps the Necrons are not simply enemies to be destroyed. Perhaps they are something more complex, a civilization with its own history and culture. Beings who were themselves victims of forces beyond their control. The biotransference that transformed them from Necron-tire to Necron was not their choice, not really. It was a bargain made under duress by leaders desperate to save their dying race. Should they be condemned for wanting to exist, to reclaim what was once theirs, to find some meaning in the endless existence they never truly chose? These thoughts remain largely private, shared perhaps with a few trusted advisors, but not broadcast to the wider Imperium. To suggest that Xenos might deserve consideration beyond their utility or threat level is to challenge fundamental Imperial doctrine. But the thoughts persist, nagging at the edges of certainty, making the next battle and the next encounter perhaps slightly less absolute than they might otherwise be. Not mercy, exactly. Not compassion in any normal sense, but perhaps a kind of respect, a recognition that the Necrons are not monsters or machines, but something that was once alive and might, in some distant future, be considered something other than simply an enemy. The Pharaons, through their own crystalline cogitations, sometimes arrive at parallel conclusions. The Imperium is a threat, yes, but also a phenomenon worthy of study. These humans, who should by all rights be primitive savages struggling with basic tool use, have instead built a galaxy-spanning civilization. They have created warriors who can stand against Necron nobility in combat. They have developed technologies that, while inferior to Necron achievements, are nonetheless impressive in their own right. And they have done all this in a mere handful of millennia, a blink of an eye compared to the timescales the Necrons measure their existence by. What might humanity become given more time? What might they achieve if allowed to develop without constant warfare consuming their resources? These questions hold a certain fascination for those Necrons whose consciousness remained intact enough to still experience curiosity. The Imperium could be seen not just as an enemy, but as an experiment in progress, a test case for what organic life can accomplish when pushed to its limits. To destroy it completely would be to lose this opportunity for observation and study, but to allow it to exist unchallenged would be to accept a permanent threat to Necron interests. And so the war continues, because neither side can afford to stop, because the stakes are too high and the costs of defeat too absolute. Primarchs lead their forces against tomb worlds, knowing that victory is temporary and defeat potentially permanent. Pharaons defend their domains, calculating the odds and making the choices that millions of years of existence have prepared them for. Warriors die and resurrect, in an endless cycle that must surely have some meaning, even if that meaning remains elusive to all involved. The galaxy turns, and the war does not end, and both sides adapt and learn and prepare for whatever comes next, because there is always something next, always another battle to fight, another opponent to face, another crisis to survive. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And in that war, the encounters between Primarchs and Pharaons stand as testament to what happens when the absolute best that each civilization can produce meets on the battlefield. The results are never certain, always costly, and forever remembered by those who survive to tell the tale. The broader implications of these conflicts ripple outward through both civilizations in ways that extend far beyond simple military considerations. Each encounter between Primarch and Pharaon becomes a cultural touchstone, a moment that shapes how each side views the other and themselves. For the Space Marines who fight under Primarch's command, seeing their gene father bloodied and driven back by Xenos forces challenges assumptions they have held since their earliest indoctrination. These lords of war, these demigods who lead the Emperor's finest, can be beaten. The Xenos are not merely obstacles to be swept aside, but genuine threats requiring the fullest measure of skill and courage to confront. This realization percolates through the ranks, changing how Space Marines approach combat with Necron forces. The arrogance that sometimes characterizes Imperial military operations, the assumption that humanity's cause is righteous and therefore must prevail, gives way to more pragmatic assessments. Officers who once would have ordered frontal assaults against Necron positions instead employ more sophisticated tactics, recognizing that their opponents cannot be simply overpowered through superior will or fervor. This evolution in thinking, painful though it is, ultimately makes the Imperium's forces more effective against the Necron threat. For the Necrons, particularly those warriors and immortals who witness their Pharaons dueling with Primarchs, something shifts in their understanding as well. These organic beings, these newcomers to the galaxy who have existed for mere moments compared to the Necrons' vast history, possess capabilities that demand acknowledgement. The Primarchs are not simply another category of enemy to be catalogued and destroyed. They are beings who can push even the mightiest of Necron nobility to their limits, who can adapt to Necron tactics in real time, who refuse to surrender even when logic dictates they should. This recognition seeds a kind of wariness into Necron strategic calculations, a reluctance to underestimate Imperial forces that might possess these exceptional leaders. As time flows forward and more encounters occur, patterns begin to emerge in how these confrontations unfold. Certain Primarchs develop reputations among the Necron dynasties as particularly dangerous opponents. Their tactical signatures become recognizable, their preferred strategies catalogued and analyzed. Some Pharaons make it a point of pride to face these specific Primarchs, seeking to test themselves against the best the Imperium can offer. Others deliberately avoid such confrontations, calculating that the risk outweighs any potential benefit. These individual dynamics create a strange kind of relationship between specific Primarchs and specific Necron leaders, mutual respect born from repeated conflict. In the end, the question of what happens when Necrons face a Primarch in their tomb has no single answer. Sometimes the Primarch prevails, destroying the tomb or forcing its defenders into dormancy. Sometimes the Necrons triumph, driving off the intruder and adding his weapons and armor to their collections as trophies. Most often the outcome falls somewhere between these extremes, both sides bloodied and diminished, but neither decisively defeated. What remains constant is the fundamental clash between two visions of what the galaxy should be, two civilizations that cannot easily coexist, two forms of existence that challenge each other's right to survive. If you enjoyed this deep exploration of one of the most fascinating potential confrontations in Warhammer 40K lore, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There are countless more stories to tell from this grim, dark universe. Each one a window into a galaxy where every moment is a struggle for survival against impossible odds. Thank you for watching, and may the Emperor protect you in your journeys through the darkness of the far future.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.